Good morning and welcome as we continue this new series of looking at the Old Testament scriptures in a new way. And this morning we turn to the book of Esther, the story of Esther in the Old Testament. Esther is in a part of the Bible that is called wisdom literature. There are 4 or 5 different types of literature that are you find in the Bible. You have some that is poetry, some that is dialogue, and different styles of writing. But there is this group of scripture that you find from Ezra to the Song of Songs in the Old Testament. Includes Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs that are in this what is referred to as wisdom literature. Literature that imparts some truth or wisdom to go about the leading of a life of faith. Now, the book of Esther almost did not get accepted into the canon of Scripture. It was, I think, if I remember my history correctly, it was the last of the Old Testament books to be canonized. There are probably, there are a number of reasons for this. The most prominent reason, what do you remember about Esther? What do you think might be the most prominent reason why it had trouble being accepted into the canon?
It doesn't mention God at all.
God's not mentioned in the book at all. No mention at all. It's very nationalistic in talking about the Jewish people. Some other issues that and I guess this is more of a modern day perspective looking at it. It's very sexist. The women are dominated by the men in this literature, this story. There's a morality issue that also comes to the surface there. And more recent academic study has turned up another tidbit as to, it just cements why it was not accepted, or the fact that it was not readily, widely accepted, is that of all the Dead Sea Scrolls and fragments of scrolls that they have found, there is no fragment that has any fragment of Esther in it. Esther doesn't exist in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which just cements that idea that this was a book that did not stand very high among the Hebrew people, outside of the Hebrew people, I should say. It takes place during the exile in Persia, and 479 BC is the setting of it. The scripture refers to the king as Ahasuerus, Ahasverus.
That's a U.
Okay, you. Ahsuerus. Doesn't roll off my tongue. His Greek name was Xerxes.
It's easier.
That's easier to say. And Xerxes is a name that we hear from time to time, and just makes it easier to place it there. As I said, it was during the time of exile where the Persians, Nebuchadnezzar was the conqueror, and had taken the Jewish people into exile into his kingdom. Xerxes is depicted is having a kingdom that stretches from India back eastward, no, back westward from that, into the area that we have today, Iran and Iraq. The city that this takes place in, Susa, is located in the southeastern corner of Iran. So that geographically, that kind of places where this is taking place. And the story, just paraphrasing it and just giving you an outline of the story here. After establishing who Xerxes is and his kingdom, says that he's having a feast, and he orders his wife to have a feast also to entertain some prominent men, and she refuses. She defies him, and he has her banished. Surprisingly, he doesn't have her killed, but he has her banished, and she's no longer the queen. And so then he sets out in this quest to find a replacement, a queen. And he orders a search to be made of his kingdom and all of the most beautiful unmarried women, which is another way of saying the most beautiful virgins in his kingdom, to be brought before him to decide who will be the next queen. And then there's this period of preparation for those that are chosen, to prepare them to see if they will find favor with the king. There were two 6-month sessions that each of these young women were subject to enhance their beauty. They were already the most beautiful, sort of gilding the lily comes to mind here. But one of the women that is selected is Esther. And she is a Jew. And that is unknown outside of a very handful of close family. And there isn't a lot of her close family. Mordecai, another prominent character in this story, is her uncle. And her mother and father had something had happened to them during the exile. And so Mordecai has taken Esther and raised her as his daughter and looks after her. And Mordecai is a gatekeeper under the regime there in Susa, and has some prominence there. And after Esther is selected, he goes about telling her how she is going to rise above the rest of the women there to find favor with the king. And when the appointed time comes and Esther goes and spends the night with the king, and the next day he's smitten and he decides he doesn't need to look any further, Esther's the one. She's going to be his queen. And then during this time, then the story takes another twist there. One of Xerxes' top men, advisors, his inner circle, is Haman. And Haman doesn't feel that Mordecai gives him the respect that he is due. And he also finds out that Mordecai is a Jew. And he decides that he's going to do something about that. And so he asks for permission from the king to go about taking care of his enemies. Now, in the meantime, Mordecai finds out that there's a plot to assassinate Xerxes, and he makes this. Mordecai, and he takes this information to the king, who investigates and finds out it's true. and so he has some favor with the king for saving the king's life there. And then as the story unfolds, Haman goes about plotting this. He gets Xerxes to sign a decree that gives him the authority to round up those in opposition to the kingdom and execute them. And so by casting lots, he decides on the time and the place when this is going to happen. And then Mordecai tells Esther that you got to go to the king and tell him what's going on so he can stop this. And so there's this series of banquets that take place, and Esther finally tells the king that she is Jewish and that Haman has planned this extermination of her people. Now, just before this happens, the king has decided that he never recognized what Mordecai had done. And so he plans a banquet. And it is at this banquet that Esther reveals to him that what Haman has done. And Haman comes to this banquet expecting to be recognized, and instead Mordecai is given the recognition and the royal robe, and he's just beside himself. But then after Esther reveals what Haman had been up to, Xerxes has him executed. Haman had built this gigantic gallows to hang Mordecai on as an example. And it turns out that he himself is the one that is hung on this gallows. And the king's signet ring, the ring that has the seal on it that's used to seal the documents, is given to Mordecai, and he becomes the second highest. He is second to the king in political importance and power in the kingdom. There is a line or a sentence in the story here when Mordecai is trying to convince Esther that she needs to do this, and when she finally comes to grips in doing it, she says that it is for a time such as this that she has been placed here in this position. Now, as a result of this, the story goes on to say that the Jews remember this, what Esther has done, with a celebration of the Feast of Purim that is celebrated in the spring each year. It's a festive time. It's been compared to our celebration of Halloween. People dress up in costumes. There's partying. It's a very festive time, but they add to it the giving of gifts along with that. Made me think of the celebration of Mardi Gras, which is a pagan celebration just before the time of Lent. Let's eat, drink, and be merry because Lent's coming and we're going to have to shape up during the season of Lent. But this is time of celebrating, remembering what Esther had done during that time. Thoughts, comments about this story? That's the history and the story itself.
I'm glad it's in the Bible. It's got that one line about being born for such a time as this. I think that's probably the only reason they put it in there. And I think it's a good thing for us to remember, because we don't know which time in our lives is the biggie, if there is one.
And when you said something about Mordecai getting the ring and being second in command, brings you back to think about Joseph. He went into Egypt, and he was made second in command after interpreting dreams, and kept the Egyptians from dying and being starved out or whatever. So God made a plan where Jewish people went into other countries and saved them, even though they were enemies. You know, he had grace, and his grace imparted them through Joseph, through Mordecai, through Esther. You know, he put them in positions in order that the rest of the world wouldn't, so to speak, die off. The enemies wouldn't die off.
Yeah. You see in here that God is in control. You see also God working within a fallen, broken system to provide protection for his people. I couldn't help but think about David in the 23rd Psalm. You know, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that I fear no evil, because I'm not alone. God's with me. And God was with his people even in this time of exile, time of peril, looking after them. Well, that's Esther. I'm really, really curious to see how Pastor Dawn is going to approach this. And I hope to see you all in worship. If you're not there with us, that you'll be there with us online, and that God's blessing will be upon you in this coming week.